The last Power Hour, we started talking about activity monitoring, which in particular deals with motion monitoring and door window open closing monitoring. And there are a couple more things that I wanted to say about that, especially about applications, which I think many of you will find interesting. And so we'll finish up activity monitoring today. And then afterwards, we will get into some small topics like light control, temperature monitoring, and action button monitoring that don't deserve their own Power Hour as a single topic, but grouped together, we can put it together in this Power Hour, specifically because they are related in some way to the activity monitoring that we've already discussed. This activity stream report is what one can generate in the account data tab to look at motion and door sensor data for a specific time period. So if you look at the list of reports, instead of selecting video call log, which we did a couple of Power Hours ago, this time you'll select activity stream and you'll get something like what you see there on the right-hand side. And if you don't need to generate any particular report and you're interested just in the current state of each of your activity sensors, whether it's a motion sensor or a door window sensor, you can go into that account for that touchscreen. Here we're looking at Raymond's bedroom touchscreen, where those sensors are configured to, and go down to the activity summary, drop down, select that option, and you'll see what's going on with those particular sensors. And so now we'll get to do a little bit of fun exercises here. These exercises will present a particular scenario which you may encounter in real life with a particular member, a concern that you would like to address. And what we can do is I can present that scenario very briefly, and then you can try to think for yourself what kind of rule or setup you would like to create for this particular member to address that concern. And so I'm posting here some of the conditions. These are the conditions for the motion sensor. If you were to install a motion sensor, then you could detect these kinds of conditions. This is, I'm putting here just as a review before we get into the exercises. Any kind of motion, the absence of motion, just one motion. After that, disable the rule, after the next motion, a bunch of motion, excessive motion in a particular time period, and then wandering motion, where you're hitting several motion sensors in a sequence. Similarly with door window, these are the conditions, a little more straightforward. Is that door window open? Is it closed? Has it been opened at one time and then afterwards you want to disable the rule? That's more common for a test rule if you're just troubleshooting. And then finally, has that door or window been left open for an extended amount of time? For this particular exercise, I'll have a couple of these, maybe 5 or so. And this first one, the concern that you have or that the staff member has is that the member leaves the house at night or may leave the house at night. And so if you are concerned about that, what kind of motion or door window rule would you set up? And in particular, I'd be most interested in the condition that you would be looking for, because the action can vary and it's a little more straightforward, more or less what you want to do. Maybe a phone call to yourself or a phone call to somebody or an internal dashboard alert that generates a managed alert, which would then require that it be claimed and resolved, or just a text message. But for now, I'll just pause briefly here for a few seconds so that you can think about what kind of condition might you want to set up for this concern. Of course, there are multiple possible solutions, and certain circumstances may vary, including the type of door, and then the time may vary as well. But here's an example of something that you might set up for this person. Front door opens at a certain time of the night. and then the action can be as you wish. But I'm particularly interested right now in just the condition. Similarly, as Leanna said, it could be a window. If somebody pops the window in the middle of the night and tries to climb out of it there, then an action could be set up for that as well, for that condition being triggered. This particular exercise, the concern is we want to know whether this particular member is making breakfast. And so I'll just pause here for a moment to give you a chance to think about how you might set up a condition and what condition you might be interested in looking for. This time, what you could do is check for no motion at a particular sensor in a specific time. So as an example, if there's no motion within 6 to 11 a.m. for that 5-hour period, then that could be an indication that this person hasn't made breakfast yet. Next one I have here is, what if you wanted to know whether a member has been in a bathroom for an unusually long time? How would you set up a rule to detect that condition and try to give you that information? So you could put a motion sensor in the bathroom, and if there's a lot of motion, let's say here for 45 minutes, seems like that's a little bit too long for this particular person, and you could check for that at any time. Then you could trigger this condition and perform an action such as an internal dashboard alert, a phone call, or a text to a remote support person. This one might be more straightforward. It's that very rare situation which you may encounter where a seizure is tied to wandering activity or walking around the house. So I'll just pause briefly here. So I think you might already have the answer based on the name of the exercise. So this is the particular situation where you might want to set up a wandering motion rule. And just as a reminder, you would need at least 3 motion sensors to use this rule. And in this particular case, the dining room, kitchen, since walking around in that particular motion or circling around the couches or something like that, that's probably how this one is set up. So that is something you'd want to know about in case it's tied to a seizure. So this is an exercise for a member who we're concerned about whether this member is taking medicine. And you can know it more or less because that medicine is kept in a cabinet. You can check if the medicine cabinet has not been opened in a specific time, and that can alert you as to perhaps there's something not right there. Perhaps this person hasn't taken medicine yet based on that particular condition that you've set up. And finally, an interesting situation in the middle of the night, the member gets up and perhaps there's vision concerns for this person, and you want to make sure that this person has a safe path to walk back and forth through the hallway from his bedroom to the bathroom. So how might you address this particular situation with a motion or door window rule? In this particular scenario, first condition that you would probably want to set up is the motion in that hallway, for example, middle of the night. That's what you see there on the left-hand side. And the action that would accompany this first condition would be the turning on of a lamp or a night light or some kind of light using a smart plug, which we will get to in just a few minutes, how to do that. And then later on, if there's no more motion in that hallway in that same time period in the night for about 45 minutes or whatever number you decide, then the action for the second rule would be to turn that light off. So it would be a dual 2 rules, one to turn it on at night and then another to turn it off after that person is presumably gone back to bed. And so here, now that we've mentioned turning lights on and off, talk about light control as an aside, and that this light control is meant to address concerns that we may have with members' visibility. So this is yet another power or capability that you have with the technology to serve the member, because a smart plug, we have specific smart plugs that integrate with the GrandCare touchscreen, in which Trillium has also purchased, and that these smart plugs, once plugged in and configured with the GrandCare touchscreen, which has an antenna, would be able to turn things on and off. And I mentioned just things because that thing doesn't necessarily have to be a light. It could be another kind of device. If there's some creative application that you can think of, but most often it is a light. And when you create a light rule, you have the ability to select amongst multiple plugs that you have in the home. And then you also have the opportunity to set for what time you'd like this rule to apply, what day. Just notice there on the left-hand side, not only specific time, but because the GrandCare has a weather service that is able to display the weather, and on the touchscreen itself, that same information also includes sunrise and sunset. And so that GrandCare knows when sunrise or sunset is for a particular zip code. So when the touchscreen is deployed, it's deployed with a specific zip code for the weather, and all that information would be localized. So if a particular member were living in a house and this particular member, for some reason, it would get dark inside his house at around sunset, what kind of rule might you set up to help provide some lighting in case this person might have forgotten, or you just want to help this person to have light at around that time? So in this particular case, you could just set the light rule so that it turns a particular lamp on, say a living room lamp, based on sunrise, sunset. You could, for instance, turn on that lamp 30 minutes before the defined sunset for that day. So you could turn it on later on with the sunrise. Or sorry, turn the lamp on during sunset, turn it off with the sunrise. And now that we've discussed light controls, we can move from activity monitoring and light controls to another type of monitoring. Not much to say here, but it is another power or capability that you have to serve the member, because the temperature-related concerns can be a thing for a particular member. And so, as I mentioned before, the weather service gives us not only sunrise and sunset, but the outdoor temperature, the outdoor humidity. So it's not just for the member seeing it on the touchscreen, but now the portal can use it as part of its rules engine. And then we know the indoor temperature as well, wherever there's a motion sensor that's situated in the room. That's the same thing that you saw in the motion power hour. That motion sensor is actually a 4-in-1 sensor, the ones that Trillium purchased. And therefore, there's a temperature sensor inside it as well that can detect indoor temperature for that particular room. So you know the indoor temperature. In case you're wondering what the other two functionalities are in the 4-in-1, it's motion, temperature, indoor humidity, and light level. With the development team, we don't use the last two for GrandCare purposes. So if you know the outdoor temperature or the outdoor humidity or the indoor temperature, you can set conditions related to greater than, less than, or equal to. And what you can have are specific specified temperature values or specific humidity values, and then on what days you would like to check those. And in terms of data, the data is available in the portal under the account data tab. If you select room temperature graph, you could see the indoor temperature data for the different motion sensors that you've installed at different locations inside the house. And then similarly, still talking about indoor temperature, you could go into the weather app of the care menu, click on weather, and you'll see the different environment sensors. And no surprise, they're all the motion sensors are also temperature or environment sensors. You can click on the graph icon and see that month's temperature data, indoor temperature data for that particular motion sensor on different days of the month. And so if you had a member for whom you were particularly interested in helping because the concern is not being dressed properly for cold outside temperature, you can think about a condition where you could set a rule, perhaps to send a message to the screen or to alert you so that you can video call on those situations. What we're interested in this case is the outside temperature. That's what's gathered from the weather service. And you could act on this particular condition right here, for example. You could similarly address a concern if you were concerned that a particular member was getting too hot inside that member's house. For some reason, you wanted to act on that, notify the member, or have a phone call go perhaps to somebody who is in the next house that you trust to check in on the member. There's specific things that you can do to act on this particular condition. This time we're looking at the inside temperature is greater than a particular value, then you would act. So that you could notify a neighbor, for example, and that neighbor could come check in on that person, or it can notify you, and you could check in on that person and suggest something, perhaps. So for the last few minutes here, I think there's a chance we can cover this. This is an action button that's available on the screen, and that monitoring this action button, whether it's pressed or not pressed, can give us some opportunity to serve the member if the member takes action or requires some action to be taken at a particular moment. We'll get into some examples here. But first of all, this is the button that shows up on the left-hand side, right underneath the slideshow and right above the notifications button. And it's a button that the member can touch on the screen. This button can be created and then configured through the care menu by touching notifications there, little icon there. And then that opens up a window that allows you to add a new action button. And in this particular case, what we're adding is an on-screen action button. And there, you'll have the chance to name what this button says. So the example that we had was a call me, but you could potentially have that say whatever you'd like it to say on the left-hand side button there. And so this one, the possible conditions to check for are more simple and straightforward. It's just two. Was that button pushed or was that button not pushed? And that makes more sense when you see the rest of the possibilities with that action button rule. You can check for that button being pushed or not pushed at a specific time period, or just have it check for any time that button is pushed or not pushed and on specific days. And then if you wanted to check on action button data, you could do that as well on the portal under the account, a particular account, in the data tab, and select action buttons from the drop down. Where you might see this is there is a video call function that we did already do in a power hour. The member could just go to the video call function button and see a list of people to call. And if you weren't there and set up for missed call texts, you could do that. But in some cases, some organizations may want just to have a general call me, and whoever it is that's available will call that person. That's one potential use for this. This button could be called call me, but it could be called something else. It could be turn light on. And if you touch this button, then the action could be to turn on a specific light in the house.